It's so hard to see when you're in the midst of a bad time. It's so difficult to see. But what's crazy is if you keep moving forward, there's so many times where you look back and you're so grateful for something terrible that happened to you, because normally that's the impetus and the stimulus for growth.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast. Today, I'm here with Lawrence Dunning. Lawrence is a London native. He holds an undergraduate and MBA degrees from the University of Exeter. He's transitioned from finance to real estate and built a diverse portfolio of properties, specializing in cash flow buildings. Beyond real estate, Lawrence is a dedicated reader, martial artist, and marathon runner, father and husband. We've already talked about our kids and what a toddler can do to the day. So I'll stop there, Lawrence, and I'll just say thank you first. Thanks for coming on the show, taking the time out to chat with me today. I appreciate it, and I'm excited to hear more about you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jason, and shout out to our mutual friend Sue for the connection. It's always great to get connected with like-minded souls. So I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sue. Well, will you just start by telling us about yourself? Tell us your story and kind of background, and then we'll go from there.
You know, I was speaking to someone this morning, Jason, and he said, wow, you've had a really interesting life. And it's looking back, it's kind of cool to have big successes and then big failures. But when you're in the middle of the failures, it really sucks. So now I'm 45, I can look back and it's like, wow, it's been a real adventure. But it's funny how if I was talking to my 20-year-old self, he could never have imagined the career changes and the life changes that have happened. But I just got really lucky. You know, someone asked me recently, who was the biggest influence? You know, was it your parents? And I love my parents, and I was very close to my dad growing up. But really, it was his brother, my uncle, and he was an entrepreneur, and he was very successful. And he also had highs and lows, but he was a photographer, and he won all these awards, and he traveled all over the world. And him and his wife couldn't have kids, so he kind of adopted me as, you know, he was my godfather as well, and we were very close growing up. He'd always take us out, my brother and I. And he bought me a book when I was young, How to Be a Millionaire. And he was always, just by his example, the way he lived his life, I was like, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be like that. But of course, when you're graduating college, you don't know what, you know, I had an MBA in finance, but in the real world, that doesn't mean anything. You know, what am I going to do with that? So I just got lucky. I got a job at a trading company that happened to have offices all over. So I got to work in London. Then they sent me to Holland, in Amsterdam. Then they sent me to Chicago, then New York, and then back to Chicago. And then I got all this experience, and I left them and I set up my own trading company, and I made all this money, and I'm in my 20s, and I realized how powerful the lesson was. But then I didn't realize it. Then I just had this love for martial arts, and I had all this money, and I realized that I'm a simple guy. Like, I bought my first condo with my first bonus at 24 before I even started my own company. And it was a 1-bedroom high-rise in downtown Chicago, nothing fancy, but it was all I needed. You know, I'm a single guy. I didn't have a car. I didn't have any responsibilities. And I realized, I was like, man, I've got all this money, but I've got this passion, this love for martial arts. And I want to see, I was an amateur boxer. I won the Chicago Golden Gloves. I was like, I want to see if I can make something of this. So I basically gave away my company, which was a terrible financial decision. I should have kept some ownership because it was very profitable, but I just gave it to one of my employees. And I took about a 5-year sabbatical, and I traveled the world. I did a bunch of cool things. Like, I did ultramarathon races and marathons. I had 10 professional MMA fights. I just did some cool things, bucket list type things. But I was very young, and I made every mistake a young person could make. It was also through the 2009 crash. I had a bunch of investments that went either to nothing or they lost 80% of their money. And then I got to 35, and I was like, okay, well, I've kind of ticked the box of the fighting. I really wanted to face my fears, and I was like, I think I've done that. And then I was like, what am I going to do? And just luckily, my best friend at the time was an attorney, and he hated law. And he said, Lawrence, he's like, you could kill it in real estate. We should start working in real estate together. And he set up his own real estate company, and we've been working together the last 10 years. And so I kind of fell into real estate. And with my background, it was a natural evolution to be more on the investment side and work with investors and get really passionate about that. And I wrote a book last year on investing in multi-family real estate. And so I kind of found my niche there. But I remember, it's a cool story when I tell it, but there were times during that process where I was, what am I going to do? I remember having my last fight, and I kind of realized how bad my finances were. And I'm like, Jesus, I'm 35 and I got to figure out what I'm going to do, because when I left the trading floor, I thought I would just go back whenever I'm ready, go back I was in the 10-year bond option pit in Chicago. I was like, I can just walk back in the pit. I know all those guys. Everyone respects me. I know what I'm doing. And I can just keep making money trading options. What I didn't realize is the 5 years I was away, that business model just went. The high frequency traders came in. There was no business model. So I was like, man, what am I going to do? And I remember calling my parents, and my mom's like, well, you like dogs. Maybe you could be a dog walker. And I was like, yeah, mom, I don't know if that's quite going to pay the bills for the lifestyle I want, So looking back now, it's been an awesome journey, lots of ups and downs and career changes. But at the time, there were some pretty dark moments. But I guess the one lesson that I'd love to share with anyone listening to this is it's so hard to see when you're in the midst of a bad time. It's so difficult to see. But what's crazy is if you keep moving forward, there's so many times where you look back and you're so grateful for something terrible that happened to you, because normally that's the impetus and the stimulus for growth. And I always use the example of me. I'm a very pro Bitcoin and crypto. I love the intellectual aspect of decentralized finance. And I only discovered it fairly recently. And I always think, man, if someone had told me 15 years ago, hey, when I was super wealthy and young, just put a couple of thousand in Bitcoin and forget about it, and I was now today worth 100 million in Bitcoin, I would have never have had the career change and rebuilding from nothing and learning a new industry in my mid-30s. And I feel like I grew so much as a human that now I'm actually grateful that never happened, if that makes sense. So it's like there's so many times where when you're in the bad times, just remember that in a crazy way, you might be very grateful for them in years to come. So just keep moving forward. I think that's my advice for anyone who's not where they want to be and they're kind of going through a tough time. And I try and remember it even now, like even recently. So I've had so many ups and downs. When I was rebuilding in real estate, after a few years, I was doing very well. And I partnered with this developer. And in 2020, when COVID shut everything down, we had 7 multi-unit projects going on at the same time. And he basically was having all this trouble. So he made me co-sign on all his loans, and then he declared bankruptcy and left me with 5 years of legal bills and problems. And I lost about $1 million. And I'm like, man, I remember thinking, like, I've already been down this road. I already made a bunch of money and then lost it and had to rebuild myself. And now I'm going through this again, but I'm 10 years older, and it's never, fun when you're older and you have less energy. So it's all these things. But even looking back at that, as bad as that was, I feel like I grew so much as a person from that. So it's such a, sorry, I'm ranting a bit, but it's such a great message that I want to share is even the terrible things that happen to you in your life, you're going to be grateful for one day. And even more so, you and I are parents. So like, I think it's great that when my son's going to have problems, if I had an easy life, how am I supposed to help him through his problems? But now I can give him real advice, and I can tell him about how I overcame struggles. So I think that's so cool. It's that reframing of problems when you realize that as a father now, you have wisdom you can pass off. So a problem, bad things that happen to you are not really bad things. They're just challenges, and it keeps life interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. You really have had an interesting life. That is a true a true statement, and some really cool stuff. But also like a whole lot of things that I think can be, sort of extracted from your story as far as being valuable to other people. One, like taking those risks when you're young is like that's the time to do it, right? It's like that's the time to go big, go try the hard things. Like that's a really good time to do it, because you mentioned this, maybe don't have as much energy a decade or two later when you're trying to rebuild, but also you may not have a family at that time, so you don't have other people relying on you and all of that. So like there's seasons of life where we're taking those big risks and chasing the dream make a lot of sense, but also like it starts to set your core and set your expectation of normal at a spot that feeds you later, as far as, okay, I went through this thing where I made money, lost money, but like, as you said, like you learn from those things, and you're able to realize like you will get through it. Like there will be hard times, you'll get through it as long as you continue to push, and come out better for it. So I think that there's, yeah, I mean, a million different things to kind of pull from there, but like, I do think that your point about taking those bad moments and using them to your advantage, there's a lot of people that would probably say there's no good that they could think of from not investing in Bitcoin 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's but we can't go back in time. And so it's like, if you're going to look at someone else's life or even your own life and say, oh, if only I had done this then, I would be here. But the same thing applies to right now. Like, if you do the thing now in 10 or 20 years, you can have that revelation, except be on the other side of it. Oh, I took that risk now, and here I am. So it's kind of a funny thing that I think people like to lament that they didn't do something a long time ago that would have made things better. But it's like, well, yeah, but you're not at the end of life. You're not, like, go ahead and do it now and kind of move forward. So, yeah, I mean,
Jason, on that
it's
point,
a
that's such a
super,
good
super
point.
interesting story.
Well, if I can just say, that's such a good point.
Go ahead.
So I was talking to some of the older guys yesterday at jiu-jitsu, and it was me, I'm 45, my friend who's also 45, and another friend who's probably early 50s. And we were all, aches and pains. We're older. Jiu-jitsu is not too easy on the body, even though technically it's called the gentle art. It's So we were saying that if our future self, if our 70-year-old self could go back and be 45 again, like, how happy would we be? But of course, we don't realize that because we only compare ourselves to how we were when we were
Mhm.
25. So I think it's just such a good reframing. It's that stoic philosophy of, a lot of people think, if I can get everything I want, X, Y, and Z, then I'll be happy. Whereas the Stoics say life is what it is, and it doesn't mean you're not going to try and better your life, but you have to be happy. We can all focus on what we have and be happy for it, or we can focus on what we don't have and be unhappy for it. And one of my favorite quotes is, a healthy man wants 1,000 things and a sick man just one. And I think about that all the time. I think every time when I've been in bed, like real sick with a flu or something like that, I always think, man, as soon as I'm better, I'm going to be grateful every day for my health. And then, of course, as soon as I'm healthy, I wake up and I want 1,000 things and I'm doing it. And it's hard. I forget, just to
Yeah.
have that blessing of health. And then the other thing is, you're in California. We were talking before we started recording about the fires and how awful it is for so many people. And it's just like we have a roof over our head. We have food on the table. We have hot water. We have so many things where, when I was young, I got to travel a lot because my father is a retired pilot. So he would take the family on trips, and I would get to go to these places where some of my earliest memories of being, and my parents are hippies. So when we would travel rough and we'd go to bad areas. And just, I remember as a kid being in places like the slums of Brazil or bad areas of India. Or I remember going to Chicago actually when I was about 8 years old, and I was like, oh my God, this city is so intimidating. I remember seeing a guy get brutally arrested and thrown in the back of a cop car. And I was like, where are we, mom and dad? So just, you have all these experiences and you realize how much of the world lives with so little. I think there's 1 billion people that live on less than $1 a day. And so it's just, these are really good reminders to focus on. That's one thing as I get older. When I was young, I was very driven, and I was always, I don't necessarily think I was the happiest. I was very productive and I did a bunch of cool things on a piece of paper. But now I'm older and hopefully a bit wiser. I try and appreciate what I have and be grateful for the things I have, not the things I want. And I'm still very driven and I still want to achieve a lot the next 2 decades. Don't get me wrong. But I'm not going to wait to get what I want or wait to do what I want to do to be happy. I'm going to choose to be happy today. And I think I wish that if there's one lesson I could tell my younger self, that's what it would be. It would be, don't wait for things to happen to be happy. So I'll give you an example. When I was fighting, there was so much anxiety before a fight. Say the last 4 weeks, you're trying to train hard, you're cutting weight, you're exhausted physically, you're exhausted mentally, you're trying not to get sick just before the fight, and you're trying to balance or injured. And a lot of time I would just think, if I could just click my fingers and just fast forward the next month of my life, that'll be so great. I can just relax and be happy. And it was only the very last fight where I said, I'm going to retire after this. I said, I'm going to enjoy the process, every single thing about it. And I was like, oh my goodness, if I had only had this mindset before, I could have actually had a much happier experience in the same career. But instead, I was always so focused on just getting through it as opposed to actually enjoying it.
Yeah. It's such a good point. And I think that it's often hard to combine being driven and also being in the moment, right? Like you're looking at, okay, this is what I'm building for them, but like, but what does today look like? And I mean, we've talked about it before we start recording. This will probably be a common theme, but I feel like that is one of the things that my kids have done for me, is that I've always been driven, but it was always kind of like, what's the next thing, right? Like I can get to this spot and it'll be, you know, in a year or 2 years or 5 years, whatever it is, or maybe it's a number, whatever the goal is, like I can get there. But then the whole time you're like, oh, I got to get there, got to get there, got to get there. And when my kids were born, you know, like that part of me didn't go away. I didn't suddenly think there's no goals. I I guess I put them on my kids. I have this goal because I'm gonna make things better for them. And there are times, and I still have to think about it, but there are times where you can almost let that get away from you, and that you forget to be there enjoying what's going on right now. And it's like they're young, and and a lot changes very rapidly for them at a young age, like the milestones and what they're learning, and physical and mental development, all of that. Like if you actually stop and watch, it's like really, really fascinating, almost like science experiment. but it's just, I think that figuring out how to, like you said, like be happy in the moment and still drive for that goal, whether it's the last fight or the, you know, closing the next business deal or whatever it is, like balancing that out is like a realistic, like that's the mystery of life, probably, is like how you put those two together. And you said, I'm going to choose to be happy now. And I think that's just it. Like you do have to kind of make a choice. And I wanted to get your input on that, and a little bit more on in maybe even how you execute it.
What you said is so true. It's like the way of thinking. I think and the problem with a lot of intellectuals is I don't think they have much common sense. I think if you want to have depth of thinking, any like say political hot topic, there's always two sides to the equation. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a hot topic. So you have to be able to hold two seemingly contradictory pieces of evidence for the same thing. So I'll give you the perfect example: the Israel-Gaza conflict. I have Israeli friends that are just horrified, and they don't even think about all the death that is everyone's getting killed in all the bombing in Hamas. They just worry. They just say, hey, you know, they started it, and until we get everyone back, we're just going to keep going. And then I have friends that are just so upset by all the innocent deaths in Palestine. And it's like, yeah, but you have to hold both of them. Both of them are horrible. The fact that a terrorist organization has taken control of this land, and they did October 7th, that's terrible. But that doesn't mean that it's also not terrible, the Israeli response. And then on top of that, it's even more complicated, because I have Israeli friends in Israel that tell me like 75% of the Israelis hate the government. They hate Netanyahu, and they don't agree with what he's doing. So all the people aren't even behind what the government is doing. But so many people hate Jews now, or Jewish people, because they blame them for what the government's doing that the Jewish people don't like. So that's just one example of something that's so nuanced and complicated from all the different sides you look at it. But people are just so blanket. They're just like, hey, this is how I believe, you know, and they're just on one side and they see every example as black and white. So that's just an example of just trying to be a bit more nuanced in your thinking. And it's the same with happening. Like what you said is perfect. You said, I actually agree. I think that's one of the challenges of life. I remember reading Arnold Schwarzenegger's biography, and he said he wrote this a while ago, but he said he has a wall, like a bookshelf of dozens of albums from all the incredible stories places he's been, travels, adventures, movies, famous people he's met, things he's done. And he said, I just never look at them because all I do is look forward. And I remember when I read that, I was like, wow, I'm exactly the same. I have a bunch of photos on my phone that I just never even go back and look. And something that parenting has really done for me is it's got me to slow down. And what you said is exactly right. My wife's a therapist, but before that, she studied early childhood development. And we talk a lot about this, where before I became a parent, the years would kind of bleed by 36, 38, 40. It didn't mean much to me. I was getting a bit older, but nothing fundamentally was changing that quickly. So I didn't appreciate the passage of time. But with my 4-year-old, every day it's like he goes to bed and he's like a little computer that downloads software. And the next day he says new things, or he says sentences better, and he surprises me. And it's like, so he gives me such an appreciation for the passage of time. I'll never get this day back with him. I'll never get this time back with him. Just before this morning, before we recorded this, I remember I went to get my wife some flowers for Valentine's Day, and I took him to the store, and he was saying all these sentences, and he was just being so sweet. And he said to me, we're in the car, he says, "Daddy, I love you, Daddy." And I just remember thinking, wow, what a sweet age. Like, I know in the future, I'm going to think when he's talking back to me as a teenager, I'm going to think, God, he was so sweet. I miss those times where he was just trying to hold my hand and go for walks in the park. And so that's the key but what you said is you also, if you're driven, I think everyone listening to this wants to better themselves in life. So we all want to push ourselves and grow and be successful in whatever spheres we're in. So you have to be striving to do things and be your best self, at the same time appreciating the journey. And it's such a cliche, but it's so true. I really am convinced that's the secret to a happy life is you do need the goals. I do believe that. I believe that humans, all the evidence suggests humans are happiest when we're striving towards something and we're improving, but we're not happiest when we get there. And I remember when I got my jiu-jitsu black belt, I think it took about 17 years. And I remember I had so many congratulations, and I won a bunch of tournaments just before brown belt. And I was getting all this, oh, it's about time, well deserved. And I remember thinking, oh, this sucks, because I've had this goal at the back of my mind. Oh, one day I'm going to get this cool thing. And it was great to have. But then, of course, when you get it, there's always the come down. And I felt like that with every big goal in my life. There's always a bit of a come down after you have it. But I still believe now that I'm happiest when I'm striving towards things. So it's trying to appreciate the journey. And that's why every day I try and do small things that really make me appreciate the time. And one of them is just, walks with my two dogs and my son. And just that's time where I really try and drink it in. And I just really try to slow down and appreciate it, because it's so difficult in business where, I get hundreds of calls, texts, and emails every day. They're just this incoming stimulus. And I feel like so many people working have that same problem where you just have so much stuff coming out. And then the news is the same. You get so many things coming at you all the time. Back in the day, we didn't know what was happening in every corner of the world. And now we have a video of every atrocity right in our face every morning. It's just too much. So it's trying to balance the demands of work and living in this technological age and your goals with also appreciating the journey and slowing down. And I think for me personally, I need space. I need to slow down occasionally. And I think for a lot of people, they're going to have that same problem. They need more space in their life and more quiet time, more peace, and less hecticness and less things coming at them.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. I think that it's hard to do, but I think you have to prioritize it. You have to prioritize some of that space. You have to really, again, sounds like put the phone down, put it in the other room, whatever you need to do to kind of remove some of that stimulus, at least for a portion of the day. Like, it's like, okay, I'm not available at this time because I am on a walk with the dog and the kids, or I'm on a walk I'm spending time with my wife on a date night, like whatever it is. Like, there's those things. And as a high achiever, an entrepreneur, real estate investor, whatever label it wants to have. But I find that it has to be scheduled in a way, like maybe not on my Google Calendar that I'm going to have dinner with, my kids, but like there are certain things that just have to go into the routine that make those prioritized, just like you would recording this podcast, just like you would, an important business meeting, just like you would schedule the closing of a real estate deal, like any of that stuff, assigning an importance to it on the family side of whatever it is. Like, we have kids, so that's what our family comes. But it's, there are things outside of work, and different seasons of life, and so. But I think it's just the idea is to stay in the game and not necessarily, reach some mythical mountaintop, because then you'll just see a taller mountain behind it. Like, it's not. It's funny you mentioned the jiu-jitsu black belt. The first like apartment syndication real estate deal I closed was maybe the most anticlimactic thing that has ever happened in my life. I was like, all the stuff, all the gurus and the mentorship programs and all this stuff. Everybody talks about the acquisition, and it's like you finally get all the stuff that goes into getting it across the closing table, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, now we own an apartment building. Now it's time to actually get to work. Like it's kind of this funny thing where like we set these arbitrary goals in. And some of them are set for us, like graduating high school, graduating college, whatever. Like you might have a thing that's like, oh, you have to do this to be able to do this. But like at the end of the day, it doesn't stop after that, and nor should it. Like it does. That's not like the end of end of learning and progress just because you checked a box. And I think it's just learning to appreciate the process is really key to like I said, just being a happier person.
Well, Jason, I love what you said about ticking the box because for the longest time, especially when I was younger, I thought I was a big reader and I was endlessly curious when I was young. And I thought, man, if I could just read all the good books and I can get this base of knowledge, I can kind of tick that box and I don't have to read anymore. And if I can just achieve these goals, then I can make enough money and I don't have to think about money anymore. And I think that's the wrong way of looking at it because now I look at it like I want to stretch out everything as long as I can because I think one of the huge problems I faced, and it sounds ridiculous when you say it sometimes, but is I have a lot of friends when I vent about something. They're like, yeah, but Lawrence, you were so wealthy when you were young and you did all this amazing stuff. And I always say, yeah, but it's gone now. Humans are happiest when we're improving. So if you have all this success early on, then suddenly your expectations get so much higher that it actually makes life harder. Whereas in order to maximize your happiness, you want to stretch everything out as long as you can. So actually right now I have a bunch of goals, but I don't even want to achieve them. Like it's human nature. We're very impatient, most people, and you want to achieve things, yesterday. Most things take a long time to get, the hard things or the things that mean a lot to us. But I don't even want them. I'm not even anxious to get what I want now. I want to stretch it out decades. And I like the idea. When I was young, I used to think if I do all the hard work early, I can have an easy life. And now I realize that there's certain things that, when I'm as old as I am, I still want to do some type of hard exercise every day. And I know I'm not going to want to do it, but I also know when I do it, I'm going to feel better after. And like all these things that I do, like every morning I get in my cold plunge and I hate the mornings and I hate the cold, but I do it and I feel better after. And I don't want to get to a stage where I'm just like, I don't want to do these hard things anymore because I know I'm not going to be my happiest if I'm like that. So it's this weird, you have to kind of turn that thinking where so many people have that idea, like I'm going to sacrifice all the important things that matter. My time with my wife, I'm going to grow distance in my marriage. I'm going to miss my kids growing up, but I'm going to make all this money, get this huge promotion, have all this prestige. And then what? Then you retire. And that's why people die right after they retire because they have nothing to strive for. They have a gold watch and they have 2 weeks on vacation and then they're bored. I think most people are happiest when they're doing things. I think that's one of the huge things that I'm very against trying to just give people money, some kind of universal basic income, because I don't think it's good for the people getting it. I think if someone was just giving me money, I think I would lose a lot of my drive and I think I would be a lot less happy. So I think just having that, and last thing I'll say, Jason, I love what you said about scheduling important things because, you and I are both in the real estate world. And the problem with a lot of businesses is you just, things keep coming at you and you can always reply to 10 emails and you can always do some searches and you can always do things. And if you don't schedule the important things, what's going to happen is things that are urgent but not important are going to come before things that are important but not urgent. So my walks with my son and my dogs, that's not urgent. I don't have to do it today. I can do it next week. But I'll regret that when I'm older, missing it. Whereas the annoying client that doesn't really need an answer, but he sends you 4 messages about some random thing for a building he's not even going to buy, he has to wait till I'm done with my dog walk. So it's trying to prioritize that, and that's Stephen Covey's I think 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That was one of his key metrics: is make sure every day you're doing things that are not urgent but they're important before things that are urgent but not important. I think that's such an important distinction.
Yeah, and I haven't read that book, but now I need to. I've never heard that description, but I love it. I think that we we get caught in finishing a to-do list. We get caught in, like you said, like these things that pop up and you're like, oh, I solved that problem. Hooray. Like maybe it gives us a adrenaline boost or something like, yeah, someone came with a problem. I fixed it. Like move on. I got that one off the plate. But like at the end of the day, as you said, like the urgent does not make it important. And it's, half that stuff, I think will just go away if you ignore it, really. Like it'll
Yeah.
solve itself in a lot of instances, but it makes us feel accomplished to keep checking off boxes. And the, but what won't go away is the memories that we make with our kids, the memories that we, time we spend with our families. Like that stuff is that is the important thing. And having, I think you've talked about sort of that purpose and drive, and having some, if you don't have that, you're less happy. I think that's 100% true. I think it's also been pretty well studied. I don't think that's even just something that you and I think is true. I think it's been pretty well studied that it's very true that having a purpose, will, you'll be healthier and live longer and happier and all of that. But I think though the people around you, whether it's family, friends, any of those relationships, like prioritizing that stuff will allow you to actually be more efficient and operate well in your business endeavors, because you'll be happy, driven, passionate about what you're doing, and have, someone to share it with. And I just think that that's like a thing that gets easily missed, and it's been missed by me. There are days I have to remind myself, not infrequently, like, hey, just like those emails will still be there after the kids go to bed. Like, go play with them. My son wants to wrestle. It's just like, just do that. Say yes to that. Get back to whatever you need to later. Like it'll be there. So yeah, I love that reframing it, between urgency and importance, and which is which.
Jason, can I ask you? So, if you can think back to just before you became a parent, were you excited and think your life was going to get better, or were you worried that you'll suddenly have way more demands on your time and responsibilities?
I was definitely excited. That I was like, maybe a little bit of both, but for sure the overwhelming feeling was excitement over what was to come. And I think, yeah, it changes your life, right? So yes, you are going to have more demands on your time, but also one of the biggest revelations from having kids for me was how much time I wasted before that. Like how much time we people waste where like, you're like, well, how did I fit keeping a small human alive into my day? And like, it's like, oh, cause I was whatever, like watching TV, or I don't even know what. Like you look back and I'm like, what was I doing with all that time? Like, and I think that's my kids have made me dramatically more efficient. I do far more now from like a business and work perspective than I did before, because I'm driven and passionate about, them, and having them a part of it, and it's setting a good example, but part of that is being present. So I think it means the stuff that doesn't really matter is just that, like we just talked about urgent and important. Like there's a whole nother subsection of stuff that's neither, and those got to go away. Like that's it. Like I just have those things. If they aren't one or the other, they go away. And now this conversation makes me realize even more, like I got to prioritize important over urgent.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's so true. That's what you said is so true. I didn't think about that, but there's so many things that are neither urgent nor important, and we need to really jettison those. Unless you need a little, we all need a bit of Netflix time every now and again. But okay, so you were different to me because you were very excited, and I just remember I heard so many negative things from people, and it wouldn't even be direct. It would be these little comments. They would see me doing cool things. My friends that were younger that had kids, they would just kind of say these little comments, like, "Oh, I enjoy doing that. You're going to do that when you have a family," and things like that. And I remember just being so depressed when I became a dad, because I thought, man, like all the fun stuff I love doing is going to end. And what I didn't realize, and I think it's such a good thing to say, is I didn't know what I didn't know. And that's exactly, I remember Elon Musk talking about this too. If you can have some appreciation for things that you don't know, it gives you so much more clarity and wisdom and power. And so I didn't know how I'd feel to have a little mini me running around and how I'd feel when he says, Daddy, I love you, and these little things. I didn't even know how I could feel that much love and happiness. And I'm so much less selfish now. I was never selfish in the sense of being an asshole or rude to people, but I was very selfish, and I was meant before I became a parent because I was very focused on my goals. And now I get satisfaction out of seeing him happy, and that's such a wonderful feeling.
Right.
So I think it's a good thing to tell people. And kids, we're using kids as the rubric, but this is an example for everything. It's the example of the guy who doesn't have money. He doesn't have, he has money, but he's not a multimillionaire, and he's not the vice president of his company. And he doesn't know what he doesn't know. He thinks, if I can get these things, I'll be happy and all my problems will go away. He doesn't know that it's not going to make the faintest difference once he adapts to it in probably a week or two. And do you want to give up decades of these other things that you and I are talking about, the rich, important things that we can never get back, for this title that means nothing? There's a lovely quote, I think it's by Oscar Wilde, but it's someone saying, like, when you're young, you always worry about what people think of you. And then when you get older, you realize that people don't even think of you. And I really believe that, so many times we get caught up in what other people think. And the older I get, the more I love the metric of trying to be, my goal is to be a black belt in life. And in order to do that, I want to live a very unconventional life. And there's that lovely quote, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. It was one of the Indian sick gurus that said that. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Like, we're going through a big change with technology, and there's half the country that sees the world very different from the other half of the country. Politically, we're very split down the middle on how we should see things. And I think it's very important for me. I think I see things differently to almost everybody, and I don't want to live a conventional life. And I take it as a huge compliment when someone calls me weird. I remember my best friend, when I told him I'm going to give away my trading company, he said, like, you're an idiot. Like, what are you doing? You have a great thing going. Why would you stop this? And I said, well, because I got bigger dreams. I don't want to live a conventional life. So I think I heard a podcast a few weeks ago, and it was the most impactful podcast. And it was this lady, and she was an older lady, and she was talking about, she's just being a real rebel, and she tries to, anything that someone says, she questions it. She's just got that same mindset. And she was talking about how we grow up. And this is something, I don't have the answer to this. I'd love your thoughts almost, but we're both parents. So we have to decide on the environment and how our kids are going to grow up. And so much of traditional schooling is just to make good workers. Traditional school doesn't teach you to think for yourself and to be an entrepreneur and to think outside the box. And so I'm trying to think now with my wife. She's from the Philippines, and we're thinking in a few years, we love the idea of buying a resort in the Philippines and kind of revamping it as a business model, but also so that we can live there for a few years and my son gets to see life on a little island in the Philippines where kids don't have shoes and adults don't have basic medical care, and life is very, very different, And so, like, things like that, just trying to live an authentic life to yourself that isn't dictated by what people expect of you. And there's a great book, there's a couple of books, but one is called, I think, With the End in Mind by Catherine Maddox. And she talks about how she was a nurse that helped hundreds and hundreds of people at the end of their life, either them dealing with dying or their family dealing with losing loved ones. And she said one of the things that people kept coming back to at the end of their life is, I wish I had just lived a life true to me, less conventional. And I think that's such a beautiful thing to think about. I want to do that now. I don't want to have the regrets of being scared to do things. And it kind of, to bring this full circle, it goes back to what you said earlier about risk. The time to take risk when you're real big risk is when you're young, because if you lose everything, you don't have anyone to support. But I do believe in taking smart risks as well, even with us when we have a family and we have responsibilities. I like the idea of taking, not tomorrow, you've got to plan it properly and have contingency plans because we have kids and we have a mortgage, but still take risks to try and live a life that you're going to be proud of one day.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, you said you're 45. I just turned 50 last month, which is like, for all of my life, I was like, that's basically the end. Like that was my thought process, was like, oh, that's super old, and I guess I'll be done then with I don't know. But like, now that I'm there and my kids are young, and I'm like, now I'm just like, nah, I just need to live till I'm 100. Like, I want to do this again. I want this much time at least again to keep doing things. Like, I think, yeah, it's gosh, we'll have there's so much more that we could talk about for like hours. So I'll have to get you back on. I love this, but yeah, it's a hard mindset to come around to. But once I did, it really does kind of, sky's the limit from from any, I think, from any perspective you look at it, whether that's like, business success, financial success, family and interpersonal success. Like, I think that there doesn't have to be like a ceiling on anything. And I continue to try to look for ways to sort of get as close to it as I can, and hopefully break through. And I feel like you have kind of that similar approach. And it's really cool and inspiring to hear the story around it and where you're at now. Lawrence, we do have to wrap it up here just because of time constraints. However, I'm serious. I'd love to get you back on again. I want to make sure. I think we've talked a lot. I usually ask everybody what their why is. I think we've talked a lot about, kind of that lane. I want to make sure people know how to get in touch with you. What's kind of when they hear this and they're inspired by your story and excited, how can people connect with you?
Well, thank you, Jason. It's been such a pleasure. And Lawrence Dunning on Instagram and LinkedIn, I'm pretty easy to find. And I have a podcast too, Enter the Lionheart. And it's basically just these same kind of conversations, because I get inspired by them too. I'm fired up now to have a great rest of the day, thanks to you. So I really appreciate your time. And right. I'll definitely love to have you on my podcast too. And we'll do part 2 soon.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Well, thank you for the time. Thank you for sharing everything you did with me. And I definitely look forward to continuing this conversation. Folks listening, I know you're gonna love this episode. Make sure you connect with Lawrence. We'll have all that information in the show notes. And as always, thank you all for listening.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why?